Today on RoxomTV News, a Bitcoin power play turns into a full-blown governance brawl as Naka acquires Bitcoin Magazine's parent company in an all-stock deal. And critics are already yelling dilution, insider optics, and who approved this? A Florida congressman goes viral for saying he'd choose dogs over Muslims and somehow thinks that's a winning floor speech. And U.S. forces are piling into the Middle East while Iran says talks are making progress, which is diplomatic code for please ignore the aircraft carriers. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's get into it. Good morning and happy Wednesday here at RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Let's get started with the top story of this hour that's coming from Geneva's negotiating tables to the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, as the United States and Iran are currently engaged in that delicate diplomatic dance where both sides say they are making progress while simultaneously reminding each other they still own very large sticks. Talks mediated by Oman reportedly produced what officials described as good progress, with both parties outlining guiding principles and clear next steps, which is speak for we are not yelling, but we are not exactly hugging either. At nearly the same time, Vice President J.D. Vance stated that military action remains an option if negotiations collapse, because nothing says relaxed atmosphere like casually mentioning airstrikes. Oil markets, well, they noticed immediately. Iran also conducted Revolutionary Guard exercises near the Strait of Hormuz and the narrow passage that handles a significant portion of the world's seaborne oil, briefly disrupting activity and reminding everyone that geography can be leveraged. This is the part where two things can be true at the same time. Diplomacy can be real, structured, and advancing, while military preparations are also real, structured, and advancing. Washington signals readiness to escalate if necessary, and Tehran signals that it does not need to win a conventional war to impose economic pain. Reports suggest U.S. contingency planning includes options for a potentially extended operation if talks were to fail, though nothing has been formally triggered as of yet. Now, none of this guarantees conflict. What it does guarantee, however, is volatility. And for those of you at home, this matters because energy markets move on probabilities, not press conferences. Even a modest increase in perceived chance of disruption in the Gulf region can ripple into gasoline prices, shipping costs, and broader inflation expectations. You do not need a declaration of war for your wallet to feel the tremor. Until there is a signed and binding agreement, diplomacy and deterrence will continue moving in parallel, and markets will continue reacting accordingly. All right, joining me this hour to talk about this story and others, the man who is more ever informed than anyone I've ever met, the legendary Nolan Bowerly. Nolan, happy Wednesday. How are you? Great to have you on.
I love life.
Love life. And I love to hear it, Nolan. It's always a treat here. Now, we're loving life right now, but there's a lot going on in this conflict here, so let's start simple. Nolan, do you think we're actually closer to a real war here, or is this just high-stakes negotiation theater where both sides posture to strengthen their bargaining position? What's your read on this one?
Well, the bargaining position of the Iranian regime is quite weak right now because their bandwidth is kind of separated. There have been a new string of popular uprisings that have taken place, so it's caused the regime to be somewhat spread thin right now. And they've got to project the regime in Iran that they've got some form of control. But the martial law that they're declaring is really bad for their optics and bad for their capacity to, hold on, my volume is apparently low. Let me see how I can get it higher.
Yeah, you're good.
So basically, yeah, there's a moment here with these tensions with the government having to perhaps go through another crackdown, which I think means that the Americans see that they're juggling fires there as it is. And if they are juggling, that does make sort of a limited strike maybe a little more likely, because it looks like the Iranian regime's hands are full and that they're spread thin enough and that there is this kind of division going on in their country, and that resources are already mobilized just to show a united front, which isn't there.
Right, right. And another interesting thing I thought about this story is the language that's being used, because we're hearing phrases like good progress alongside other things like military action remains an option. So, Nolan, my question for you is how should regular viewers interpret that contradiction? Is that just normal diplomacy, or is that maybe a bit of a red flag? What's your read on it?
Well, no, it's because really the constituents involved here are so complex, right? You've got
Hmm.
Iranian Americans who really do want change, but they don't, no one really has a clear idea of what change would look like, right? There's some ideas about reinstalling the king, I guess, but that's not well viewed by many people. That's not a
Hmm.
unanimous thing. So you've got this weird tension that a lot of people want change. There isn't an obvious solution to fill the vacuum. So indeed, there is this language that should be seen as sort of transitionary and just waiting for more of the pieces to fall into place, I think, because it is a complicated
Hmm.
situation, more than most. It's in the case of Venezuela, much simpler, right? You
Right.
had an idea that there aren't a lot of people, who there wasn't really much left to salvage. Whereas, Iran, this is a very a well-developed country with a lot of really strong attributes, and you don't want to start over from zero like in Iraq.
Right.
Nobody wants that, right? So,
Hmm.
I would say that the language that you hear from Americans is because there probably isn't a catch-all answer here.
Hmm.
There's opportunities and there's circumstances on the ground changing. The main
Hmm.
circumstance that I see over there is that the protests have started up again, despite the violence that was inflicted on the protesters last time around. So that to me means that the actual regime over there has to or is afraid of domestic rupture more than strikes.
Hmm.
And because they're more afraid of domestic rupture, that's their priority right now, is
Hmm.
stopping more of these protests from happening. So that
Right.
does give America and Israel, I think, a lot of space to use words to fill in the time and the air while we
Hmm.
wait to see if these new popular protests amount to anything, which they
Yeah.
usually do.
Right, right. And when we know there's not just turmoil domestically, this particular situation does have ramifications outside of Iran, as we're seeing right now. Oil markets reacted almost immediately to the rhetoric we were seeing in this military buildup. So, my question for you, Nolan, is especially with AI data centers and the race to get all the energy available right now for, Bitcoin mining, AI, everything else, how sensitive are energy markets right now to even small increases in perceived geopolitical risk, especially at a time where energy is kind of the end all be all for everything? So, what are your thoughts?
Very little in the case of
Very little.
Iran.
Hmm.
America's most important ally, you could say. Some people say Japan right now. We saw the Japanese American economic deal start to play out today. That's a big one. But more importantly, probably for America, is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia forms, along with Japan, the sort of twin powers that allow America to really have a competitive advantage against the other superpowers of the world, like China and like Russia. And what we've
Hmm.
seen from the United States and Saudi in particular is Saudi has come out and said straight away they will replace any amount of supply that is missing from any forced issue in Iran. It really does affect China more, but
Mm.
America is always ready to sell to China. They will sell the Venezuelan crude to China if needed at market prices. So I suspect that Iran is alone here. That they don't have a lot of allies when it comes to this, because indeed they can't really affect global oil markets anymore. They're not really truly a global oil producer anymore in a lot of ways because of sanctions and what Trump has been doing. So the world is used to not having it. What you're seeing today is probably just some traders with a bit of advanced knowledge about maybe some supply chain, that kind of
Mm.
stuff. It's nothing systemic that would lead to oil prices breaking out. And many people want the oil prices to break out a little bit. They're quite low, actually. So there's a lot of markets in the world that could use a little increase in price. So it's well within global elasticity around energy prices. Of course, Trump wants them down because he's going after as much supply as he can get to get the oil prices as low as possible. So it's not the preferred solution, but I don't think it's a big global concern.
I don't know, man. Oil price is quite low. I'm paying $5 a gallon up here in the Bay. It
Well,
seems
yeah,
pretty
well, you
high to
have a particular problem.
me.
California is separate. California, of course,
Mm,
has
brutal.
closed its oil refineries and is having to get oil now from the Bahamas and all these weird places. If you see the route that it takes to get oil, it might go up to $10 in California, but that's particular to California, to the point where you might, because two refineries were closed this week, there's actually people mentioning that Trump might actually militarize the oil refinery in Los Angeles to keep it from closing down, because it's only closing down because of state like global warming rules or something like that. So there's a lot of people saying that they might just declare it a military base so that they can use it again.
Oh, I tell you, if we get $10 a gallon, I'm sending Newsom a very strongly worded letter, but
It
hopefully it
might be
doesn't get to
10.
that.
People are saying 10 by the
Ah,
summer in California. Yeah, yeah. In
well,
Vermont, I think we're at $3, three and a quarter, maybe
sounds
3.50.
lovely.
Uh,
Sounds just lovely. All right, but one more question on this one. We're going to move on. I want to zoom out here into your wheelhouse a little bit here, Nolan, because when we see global conflict risks like this kind of rise, and we're seeing trust and political stability continue to decline, do you feel like that structurally strengthens like the long-term case for a hard asset like Bitcoin, or is that maybe too simplistic of a narrative for this right now? What are your thoughts?
No, that's exactly what's going on. I think that if you look at what's happening with political money, let's call it fiat, right? Fiat
Mm-hmm.
money being political in nature, it's government debts that are used as money, and the whole world has been operating on that system for a long time. But it looks like those political dollars are about to be even more explicitly political. So
Mm-hmm.
the US dollar really going to have to be mobilized towards helping people with this change in vocation that's coming from AI, and the confusing nature of how people are going to make money if the pace of change keeps up. So you can see political money becoming much more explicitly political to realize policy goals and to help keep a standard of living that we are technically capable of, but maybe we just don't know how to redistribute the money in a way that will keep everyone fed for a brief period. But the
Mm-hmm.
companies that are really producing things like energy, they don't want to wait around and get paid in food stamps. So the
Right.
beginning of the separation of money and state probably lies in the energy pricing. And when you see something like BRICS, when you see something like China having to buy tremendous amounts of energy, people saying China is trying to get out of its US debt boondoggle. They're trying to get out of supporting the US government and buying US debt, and being part of funding the US government through buying US bonds, which they've been doing for years to artificially suppress their currency versus the dollar to keep them as an export nation towards America. You see Russia running headlong into also creating something like BRICS, a separate
Mm-hmm.
settlement system. A lot of people talking about gold settlement for energy. Bitcoin does well here because the world will have to agree on the price of some things. We
Right.
might have a different price for rice in America versus China because we're about political goals here. And I would imagine wheat and bread might be cheaper just because of cultural biases in
Right.
America versus rice, something along those lines.
Yeah.
But energy can't exist that way. Energy needs a global price, and
Mm-hmm.
energy is the most important industry in the world. They already run the world, right? The energy companies are already at a big portion of what decides incentives, decides action. We saw that, it's sort of a meme, where's the oil whenever you see an American war? It's like, where are they getting the
Mm-hmm.
oil from this time, right?
Right.
So that's been around for a long time. And we understand that the energy is a big part of the incentive. So energy, and I mean, that's what made me so excited about Roxom from the very beginning. The idea of a Bitcoin denominated and settled global price of energy
Mm-hmm.
is probably the beginning of completely changing our system to have something like neutral money that the rest of the world could use. So the conflict here, unfortunately, you don't want to be profiting off of conflict, but I do anticipate it is ushering in an era of Bitcoin denominated, Bitcoin priced, Bitcoin settled energy markets, because everyone in the world can agree on that. They're not going
Mm-hmm.
to agree on the political nature of the renminbi or the ruble or the dollar. These are becoming regional currencies, not global currencies. They're becoming even more explicitly what they asked to be from the beginning: government debt as money.
Mm-hmm.
This will be government policy objectives as money.
Yeah.
Food
Yeah. Well,
stamps.
Lot going on there, and we're going to move on here, Nolan. We went from a story talking about political money to our next story, which is about political foot in mouth. As down in Florida, Congressman Randy Fine has managed to turn an X post into a full-blown national controversy that has absolutely nothing to do with passing laws and everything to do with lighting the internet on fire. Fine wrote, "If they force us to choose, the choice between dogs and Muslims is not a difficult one." According to Fine, he was responding to comments tied to a satirical post about dogs being considered unclean under certain Islamic norms, referencing activist Nurdin Kizwani. Now, Kizwani then replied saying she was resigning from the position many of you seem convinced I hold, which is a pretty sharp way of saying this was a joke and you missed it by a mile. Instead of walking it back, Fine doubled down in an interview on Newsmax, arguing that Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were essentially saying, we are going to get rid of your dogs. Let's take a look.
Here's my view. It's not enough for Democrats to think anyone who wants to come here illegally should be able to do that. They also think they should be able to get whatever free stuff they want. Now they're demanding that we change our values and how we live as Americans. My post was in response to a major Muslim leader saying dogs should be forbidden from New York City because to some Muslims it bothers them. Well, if they're going to make us choose between our dogs and them going home, the choice is easy, and people should know Democrats like AOC are saying we are going to get rid of your dogs. Americans need to keep that in mind when they go to vote in November.
Yeah, it's really just a wild concept to think that people would have to actually give up their pets.
Shockingly, that did not calm anyone down. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries called the comments, here we go. Sorry, they messed up my prompter here. All right. Okay, we're finding it. Okay, so that did not calm anyone down. Representative Ocasio-Cortez labeled them one of the most disgusting statements from an American official and pushed for censure. Even Megyn Kelly weighed in, calling Fine a pathetic, sweaty man, which tells you this crossed factional lines. Some Democrats are now exploring whether to force a formal censure vote if Republican leadership declines to act, though no measure has been formally introduced yet. Supporters of Fine argue that he was making a broader cultural point about assimilation and satire being weaponized. Critics argue that comparing an entire religious group to animals is not cultural commentary. It is dehumanizing language from someone who writes laws for a living. And here's why this matters to those of you at home. When elected officials trade in viral outrage instead of policy substance, the tone of politics shifts, and that tone eventually bleeds into legislation, community trust, and America's reputation abroad. In an attention economy, the loudest line often wins the day, even if it leaves the actual issues untouched. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, when we have a member of Congress like this post something this provocative and then double downs on it on national TV, what actually happens next inside Washington? Are there going to be any real internal consequences here, or does this mostly live and die by the media news cycle? What is your beat on these statements?
It's on, Sneeko's already in on it. Sneeko's freaking out about dogs 2 online now. So you got Sneeko getting his video clips in around it. So it's exactly that. It's online outrage. You don't like seeing sectarian violence come into, or sectarian debates come into American politics, right? This is sort of an Israel, a very pro-Israel member of Congress, Randy Fine is, which is obviously people's right in America to be very pro-Israel. But he's bringing that frame, let's not forget, right? And I'd say on a wider level, right, on a wider level, America probably has never had as good relations as it does now with the Muslim world. You look at the reception Trump got, for example, in Saudi Arabia and UAE last May when he took a visit there. As I mentioned in the last piece, I think it's probably America's most important ally. That's why you had MBS visiting Trump around Thanksgiving last year for a really friendly looking meeting. And Saudi Arabia is not nothing, right? The House of Saud and Saudi Arabia itself is actually the steward of the Islamic religion. That's where the 3 holiest sites of Islam are: Medina, Mecca, and of course the mosque of Muhammad. So that's why the caretaking of the religious holy sites fall on the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and in particular, the king of Saudi Arabia. So as
Mhm.
long as the king of Saudi Arabia and Trump are fine, it's not going to leave any form of, it'll never get further than online fighting. And indeed, now it's persuasive. People love their dogs and people love their religion. So you're
Yeah.
mixing a lot of stuff here at once. But no, I just think this is play acting from people that are reciting these lines regularly. They're getting attention and they're loving it. It's just typical online stuff.
Yeah, I mean, those are really two hot button topics for Middle America: religion and your dog. I don't know if we can find two more that'll elicit more of a firestorm from people if you talk about them. And in response to from these comments we heard, we're hearing news of a possible censure. But for people watching at home who don't live inside congressional procedure, Nolan, what would that realistically mean? Is that a serious reprimand, or is that more of a formal statement that says we disapprove and then everybody just kind of moves on?
Yeah, it's the House is responsible for themselves, right? Because
Hmm.
there's weird rules about freedom of speech on the House floor. Like it's one of the only places you can lie and not be sued for defamation. There's a million political reasons for that. They don't want what is being said on the floor to be applicable in any court for millions of reasons that you can understand the consequences of political fallout would be. So the House, in the tradition of the United States, has to be responsible for policing its own members because no one else in the world is allowed to police them
Hmm.
by the very nature of the institution. So
Yeah.
it's up to them to set the rules. Just like they can kick people out according to their own rules, they're able to set their own rules when it comes to censoring and saying that what someone said is over the line. It's the only mechanism we have in order to get across political lines. I expect this to go completely political, though. I can't imagine this ever leaving the realms of politics.
Hmm. And aside from a possible censure, there's clearly outrage here from John Q. Public, specifically the Democrats, and even some conservatives weren't too pleased about this. But my question is, Nolan, do moments like this actually shift broader public opinion at all, or do they mostly just kind of reinforce the existing political camps without really moving the middle? Do you think there'll be any real consequences as a result of this?
Well, dogs can be persuasive.
Yeah, they can.
They can be persuasive. But I don't expect this to trigger too much of a fallout. In a normal time, maybe. But the amount of news that exists now, the kind of news we can expect over the next few months, the kind of news cycles we're living through today, even dogs, even Islam, none of this has got the kind of legs compared to Epstein or any of the stuff we expect over the next few months. I mean, we've got the Fed chair changing in May, the big news there that's going to have all kinds of repercussions. So I imagine
Hmm.
this will not be an issue by the time we get to any way that it could become accountable. And I think most people who are engaging in this kind of debate around Islam or dogs are already of a mind to be in a conflict. It's one of those ones where it's like you're just doing it for the love of the game. Like I don't see anyone
Yeah.
just joining this because like, oh, wait a minute. I love dogs more than Muslim people, or I just don't see
Yeah.
anyone else who's not already on that battlefront being enticed into this debate. It looks like people who just like the love of the game and debating
Hmm.
stupid shit online and shit talking have something to shit talk about. It doesn't, and it won't rise to anything of the level of, like I said, being an international incident or even a domestic incident. I think Trump's relationship with the Middle East is probably stronger than any president we've seen. And it's even an infrastructure. Trump thinking about how to get around both the Strait of Suez Canal and
Hmm.
the Red Sea Strait because of Yemen. There's an actual physical infrastructure project that's part of the David Accords, which is to build build a rail line from the Saudi oil fields into the Mediterranean and through Israel.
Hmm.
And if that happens, then no one's going to be talking about dogs or Sneeko or this lady. And really, where this story actually came from, as I understand, is that because New York didn't get its snow plowed and all of the things that Mamdani did with the snow removal, what it ended up doing and inciting when the snow finally did melt from 3 weeks ago is that everyone left their dog shit in.
Oh, charming.
Yeah. So apparently New York is like buried. That's where this all came from, was that it was actually outside, and this lady, and everyone's grossed out by it. So in the end, the world will eventually come together and blame communism for the troubles, not Muslims or dogs.
Hey, whatever gets us to not talk about the Epstein files, right? What happened to those? And if Trump really wanted to get people to really stop talking about the Epstein files, he would start saying things like the Muslims are going to eat your dog or take your dog or something. It's like the ultimate fire point deflection mechanism. So I'm waiting for it, but we'll see. You and I, in the meantime, Nolan, we're going to take a quick break, but when we're back, we're going to be talking about Naka acquiring BTC Inc. as controversy erupts after that announcement. So we got a lot going on here at Roxom TV News. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to Roxom TV News. The Bitcoin price this morning is sitting at around $67,000, and it's time for our Bitcoin stories of the hour. This first one starts in the Bitcoin boardroom and ends on Nasdaq's compliance desk. David Bailey announced that Nakamoto Inc. has signed definitive agreements to acquire BTC Inc., the parent company of Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin Conference, along with UTXO Management, in an all-stock transaction. Bailey posted on X saying, "Our journey started 14 years ago when Bitcoin was only $10. Today is day 0. He positioned the move as part of a long-term hyper-Bitcoinization strategy, saying the acquired companies will generate recurring earnings to strengthen the balance sheet and support further Bitcoin accumulation. Within hours, critics pushed back. Justin Beckler published a viral essay titled The Nakamoto Heist, writing David Bailey used a public company that has lost 99% of its value to buy 2 private companies he founded at 4x the stock price with no shareholder vote required. After merging with Kindly MD in May of 2025, Naka reportedly surged from roughly $2 to over $30, at one point trading around 23x NAV. Pipe investors entered at approximately $1.12 per share, while retail paid multiples above that. Only months later, the stock fell nearly 99% and is currently trading around 28 cents. Roughly 363 million new shares are now being issued under prior contractual pricing near $1.12. Critics call it dilution. Supporters say the terms were disclosed in merger documents and legally approved from the start. Bailey responded directly, calling the circulating critique inaccurate and slanderous, and saying a formal rebuttal is coming. Early Bitcoiner Marshall Long said investors were pitched this exact strategy from the beginning. Still, the numbers are hard to ignore. Nakamoto refinanced debt multiple times during the downturn and is now under a NASDAQ compliance clock after trading below $1 for more than 30 days. To regain compliance before roughly June of 2026, shares must close above $1 for 10 straight trading days. At 28 cents, that implies more than a threefold move. One more wrinkle to this, Nakamoto ranks 19th among public Bitcoin treasury companies and appears to be the only top 20 firm that sold Bitcoin during the downturn, offloading 366.91 BTC in November of 2025. Now, this matters at home because Bitcoin may be code, but Bitcoin equities are capital structures, and capital structures decide who survives a bear market. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, for our viewers at home who don't live in stock filings, when a company issues a huge number of new shares to buy something, why does that immediately make some investors out there nervous? What's your read on this situation?
Well, there was dilution, and the price is, people are questioning the price because it's David paying David, right? David Bailey, the CEO of both companies, paying himself. People expected with the stock downturn that he would pay himself nothing because it was a way to save money. My understanding is Justin Belcher's analysis is completely wrong, and in fact, he is one of the least credible voices that I know of in the industry in terms of math. He's not very good at math. I think he has it exactly backwards. I think that instead of 4x the valuation, they did take a haircut. But don't forget, there's a lot of shareholders of BTC Inc., of the Bitcoin conference and all these things that, David had obligations to them too. So you can't just go 0-0. He's not just paying himself. There were other owners. I understand he had executive decisions. Now, that doesn't mean that Naka is doing great. I think they do have a ton of trouble ahead. The risk of being delisted from NASDAQ is real. It looks like they'll have to do a stock split. The Bitcoin looks encumbered, so it looks like indeed if there's a further drawdown in the price of Bitcoin, he is going to have to liquidate more. And the business model of events at the scale they've been doing them, I mean, they changed the game in terms of the size and scale of events in this industry, but I'm not sure if you'll ever see that kind of a size and scale of an event again, like we saw last year in Las Vegas and the year before in Nashville. Bitcoin's just sort of becoming part of the room. And the idea of like an internet conference today is ridiculous. It's just conferences and the internet's a subject. I've long suspected Bitcoin will go the same way, and that a dedicated Bitcoin conference just for Bitcoin culture, if we're right about Bitcoin culture, it's just culture. And you won't have to add Bitcoin culture anymore. If you win and systems align with your wealth and success, then that will change. So I do believe they have a lot of long-term horizons. Just what I see from Justin Belcher is some of the worst analysis I've ever seen, and I'm one of the original analysts in this industry in terms of data and stuff like that. I mean, he looks illiterate. He had it completely backwards. Now, the criticism is fair. I think he's right about the criticism, but the math that he had was literally the opposite. So I do think David will have, I don't know what kind of a case, if he's litigious or something about it. He might have it on the math. But directionally, Justin was correct. I can see why a lot of people have a problem. There's numerous headwinds. Now, in David's defense and David Bailey's defense, there is a lot of cash flow there, and it is more cash flow than most Bitcoin companies. So there is a potential, but there's also a lot of anxiety in the industry. A lot of people have lost money, but this was always the plan. So that is true what Marshall Long said. The plan was always to acquire these companies. Maybe it should have been done from the beginning to take away confusion. That way you don't have to have this increase stock output that they had to do to buy the company because they bought it in shares. The whole thing has been pretty messy, and I understand why most people in the industry are upset. And it actually, the amount of anger out there does affect the overall cash flow. So a lot of work to be done over at the Naka end to come out of this.
Boy, Nolan, tell me how you really feel. I don't think I've seen someone get excoriated like that since the last Saw movie. Ouch. Now, I want to get back to this story, though, jokes aside. If you're someone who owns stock in Naka right now, Nolan, what's the real risk here? Is that your ownership just gets watered down, or is that maybe management might be overpaying right now. What are your thoughts on that one?
That was the overpayment of the executives, I think, came out just when the lockup ended, and that did create a round of negative press before the markets went really liquid. So that was already in there, but I think they changed that. My understanding is they listened to that blowback from the community and changed some of the payment schedules, but I don't know the details on that. It might not be true. I've heard folks from over there say they had changed it, so they might have. That might be the case.
Yeah.
So the dilution, yeah, it's shareholders there, but if you've ridden it down to where it is now, I think we're at 30 something cents a share. It went live at a bit over $1. It went up to 20 something when it was locked up and no one had any liquidity or could sell. So there was a lot of paper gains in people's minds. So paper losses came after. And I'm not sure exactly what the dilution means. How much dilution relative to how much was out there. I think it was something like 390 million shares or something like that. But if that's the case, then if it's 30 cents a share, we're only talking about 100 million US trash tokens, which I think is a fair price for everything included with the event, at least according to the cash flows from before. I wouldn't have paid that much just given my understanding of where events are headed. I would have thought of some other place to put my money, but that doesn't mean I'm right about where events are headed. So I could see why they would get for that kind of a brand that's been around for that long. It doesn't seem unreasonable. And if that truly was the acquisition cost in stock, it makes sense. But if you're a Naka shareholder sitting at 30 cents and you've already ridden it down, there's not much further down to go. So probably better off holding and hoping.
Yeah, I got a feeling those Naka investors aren't feeling too great. They saw the price plummet. Now they're feeling like Eduardo Saverin over there with their shares getting diluted. So not a lot to be happy about right now. And we're seeing that because this deal has sparked a lot of online debates in a very short amount of time. So my question for you, Nolan, is does that usually mean there's something structurally wrong with the deal, or is this just the Bitcoin world being the Bitcoin world and reacting as they do?
Yeah, Bitcoiners do have a high tolerance for debate and let's say trying arguments on for size. So a lot of Hail Mary, haymaker type throws, just everyone going at it. You're dealing with money for sure. You're dealing with egos. You're dealing with long brewing feuds that have been around for a long time. There's a lot of sort of feudal type situations in the industry. There's a lot of bad blood over the years. You've got really big online fights between David Bailey and let's say Barry Silbert. Multiple people in the industry. If you're front and center like David has been, you can't just be friends with everyone. There's people who you're going to piss off. There's people who are going to like you. And so he's been in the middle of that. He's a big boy. He knows all that stuff. So he's been around these fights for a long time. So I don't think it's anything new. But indeed, I think a lot of this comes from the euphoria that the industry felt last year at the beginning of the Trump administration and the crypto council, and this idea that we were headed into a long-term bull market, and none of that materialized. So I think what you're dealing with is the typical market downturns. Chemistry and get along gang happens when everything's going great. When the industry's got a bear market, this is what happens. Everybody fights because everyone's got excuses for why they lost. Everyone's got stories about why they lost. And people lost here, right? That's the truth. People lost. People don't like losing, and they lost. And so everybody involved lost. So that just turns into these types of fights. There's a pathway to redemption, of course. All hope I don't think is completely lost. But it is a very, very arduous road that they have. They're going to have to find actual cash flow, not just speculation to get back on even footing. They got to find ways to actually get cash. We're in a world of action and activity and real things happening. So if they can find a way to get cash flow, actual cash flow, more than they have now, and they're I think David's accurate when he says that they're the second highest cash flow Bitcoin Treasury Co. after MicroStrategy. I think MicroStrategy has something like 700 or 800 million US dollars in cash flow for selling the software that Strategy sells, the micro strategy software, the supply chain management software. So that's a viable business. That's what Michael Saylor bought his original Bitcoin off of before he created all of these exotic financial structures to go find more money. His original Bitcoin came from the cash flow of Strategy. So the redemption arc, if there is one for Nakamoto, and I do believe they are the second highest cash flow, but it's, I like my analogy of like US football, right? They're the second place, like football country, right?
Yeah.
the United States.
Yeah, we love the Euro League.
And I don't know who's number 2 in US football, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. So it's a bit of that. So I do believe they're number 2, but in the way that the number 2 US football team is number 2. Who plays U.S. football? I mean, the number 2 country that plays American football.
Right. I think like there's like a European league that's much. It's like multiple tiers.
Yeah, they're all
below. Yeah.
If you made a national team and they tried to play, then it would probably be Canada, and we would probably lose Canada to the United States in football 120-0. And that would be I think Canada's number 2 because we actually, we have Canadian football, right?
The Arena League is interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's still American football.
Yeah, it's got some weird rules, though. It's a little bit different. But yeah, it essentially is American football. You are right. So, all right, we're going to move on to our next story here, Nolan, as the PageJoin Foundation has received official 501c3 status from the IRS, which may sound like paperwork, but in the world of Bitcoin privacy, paperwork is power. The designation means that donations are now tax deductible, giving the foundation a more stable and scalable funding base beyond earlier support from groups like OpenSats and Cake Wallet. PageJoin focuses on implementing BIP78, a transaction format that subtly changes how Bitcoin payments are assembled. And in a typical Bitcoin transaction, one party provides all the inputs, and the analytics firms often assume those inputs spent together belong to the same entity. PageJoin disrupts that assumption by having both the sender and the receiver contribute inputs through partially signed Bitcoin transactions, or PSBTs, which on-chain look completely ordinary. There are no neon signs flashing privacy tool, and that's kind of the point. It also allows for more efficient UTXO consolidation and can potentially reduce fees, which means it is not only about privacy, but also about operational efficiency. And for those of you at home, this matters because Bitcoin's ledger is public and permanent by design. Financial transparency at the protocol level is powerful, but everyday users still value normal privacy in their transactions. With nonprofit status secured, the PageJoin Foundation now has the legal and financial structure to expand adoption in a standardized, non-commercial way, strengthening Bitcoin's resilience without altering its core rules. And in a world where surveillance capabilities keep expanding, building privacy tools responsibly and transparently is infrastructure work that pays dividends long before anyone notices it's working. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, for everyday Bitcoin users out there, what does this nonprofit status actually change? Is it something they'll notice, or is it more a behind-the-scenes infrastructure type thing? What's your read on this one?
I'd say it's necessary because, one part of your introduction that I'll disagree with is that users simply don't value privacy because there's no such thing, right? We just don't have, it's all theater kid stuff. There's no privacy. No, there's no such thing. If someone else can read the other app, if someone else can read the other communication, we just don't care. And we don't care because we've grown up in a fiat-induced world of consumption. And so I fundamentally believe that it has to be in a nonprofit for now because it is simply not economical. No one will pay for this stuff. There's not enough people that will pay for it. There's not enough incentives out there because people simply don't value it. My face is scanned everywhere I go. I don't care. Someone says, scan your face, get a password. I just do it. I don't even think about twice. And I know about all the leaks. I just don't think privacy is real. Now, we can change our actual valuation of this. And I've always believed it's a two-step process. Once we fix the money system itself, once Bitcoin fulfills its role in macroeconomics and what we talked about earlier when it came to oil and separating money in state and the Federal Reserve, once Bitcoin has its effect there, you can actually start seeing how humans will change their mind about valuing privacy. That's the problem today. We just don't see the value in it. We don't really value it. We don't really care. We care, people nag about it, but nagging doesn't work. I mean, all the
Mhm.
privacy people, that's why it's theater kid stuff. They're just nagging. You got to care about your privacy. It's all just theater. And so what we really need is for society at large to recalibrate and revalue and reprioritize privacy. And then we have a fighting chance. Then it's when it's going to become an actual commercial incentive. But for now, before we see something like a bit bond, before we see oil settled and priced and denominated in Bitcoin, before we really get to that first mimetic world that Bitcoin offers, the 21 million hard cap, before we get to that point, I don't think privacy stands a chance. And so you need these kinds of inducements. You need this kind of charity. You need this kind of stuff because it is simply not economical to do. And the actual schemes we've seen before with Monero, that didn't work. That thing got completely reorged. It's total dog shit now. Maybe people say Zcash works. I don't know. I gave up on that quite a while ago in terms of its being able to deliver on all of the business case that I thought was there for privacy. I thought this was a real thing that was possible with cryptocurrencies at one time. But 10 years have proven me wrong. And it looks like people like the market side more, the macroeconomic side more. It's got way more products, way more money, way more activity. And I still see it in a two-step process. You take care of the money part first. You change the way people value things. You change what they're afraid of, what they want. You really have to get into the subconscious mind of users and alter society. We have to be different people. And then, like I said, I think you have a commercial case for privacy, and it could happen naturally on its own with market forces. Right now, this stuff is vital because you've got to build the infrastructure to be ready when people might change their minds and alter their valuations of privacy. Now, I'm not describing individuals in the world who value privacy. Those people exist 100%. They're important. Some of the most important people in Bitcoin, the people that do that, the people that are focused on this, but they're living so far in the future without acknowledging all of the theater kids that are, doing privacy theater all the time. That is fake.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad your tone changed a little bit. You went from there's no chance for privacy, which is not the usual optimistic, I'm excited for the world tone that I'm used to, but you kind of pivoted there at the end. So it sounds like we've got a chance, which I appreciate. I always prefer your optimistic tone. There's enough doom and gloom out there. I need the optimism from you, Nolan. I crave it. And I want to get back to this story though, and I want to kind of talk about what maybe the effects of PageJoin could be over time. So, Nolan, if we had more wallets start using PageJoin, do you think that makes Bitcoin transactions meaningfully harder to track in any way, or is the impact maybe more subtle than that? Do you see what that impact could be if we start using PageJoin?
My understanding, the way you describe it, is that it confuses inputs and outputs like a coin join. And coin join, Tornado Cash, and all that were great innovations. I was a big fan of them from the beginning. They let you blend into the crowd, and they use these techniques to enhance your privacy. So I was always a fan of the coin join stuff. I always admired the people who stuck with it, used it all the time. And didn't go for the convenient, just quick P2P transactions and use these tumblers and mixers. I thought when Roman Storm was, put on trial, it was a travesty, obviously. So having any new technology willing to test out that mixing inputs and outputs, I think, is great, because I'm obviously completely against what happened to Roman Storm and a similar iteration of this technology with the mixers and the tumblers and the coin join stuff. So when I see this, I don't quite understand what it is. I haven't looked closely at it. What I understand from your quick description is it does mix the inputs and outputs in such a way that you could enhance privacy and confidentiality with this. So if there's more business cases, I do believe there is some demand out there for this. It's just not enough to change the world. There's the typical demand for this stuff. So I suspect that these techniques are the way to do it. I don't know. I don't know what the proposal is exactly. And is it a hard fork, a soft fork? I'd have to take more of a look at it to see and judge its short-term viability. But indeed, you want these things, because I do believe this is going to happen. We are going to change our minds, and we are going to value privacy in the future. We're going to get to that point. I don't know if it's in 5 years or 10 years, but it's going to come. And if we didn't build anything, that is a moment where Bitcoin could fail. It's got to have these features. If we change the financial system, it's going to lead us inevitably to a different consumer mindset. And that different consumer mindset that we have now, which is like, oh my God, there's a picture of a cat. Let me see it, scan my face, whatever I have to do. I want to see this AI cat right now. I got to see it, right? And we all fall victim to that. I'm exaggerating in terms of of my own susceptibility to it, but I don't want to pretend that I'm better at privacy than others when I've been like, show me that video many times, right? Sign me up. Where do I put my email, right? So I sign into any Wi-Fi in an airport if they want my email. Like I can't be bothered, right? And I think that's the attitude a lot of people have. Everyone is complacent. Nagging isn't going to work. It's just doesn't work, right? We tried to nag people about Bitcoin for many years. It doesn't work. And they've got to find out on their own. And Bitcoiners also have to find out on their own about privacy. I have to find out on my own about privacy. And I suspect that the reprogramming of the American consumer mind will lead us to value privacy more. And I hope these folks like this get it built in time.
Yeah, I hope so too. And once you've gotten a little opportunity to bone up on PageJoin, I'm going to be curious to see what your thoughts are, because whatever it is, I'm going to place a very sizable bet on Polymarket based on your prognostication. So I'm counting on you for that next one, Nolan. All right, moving on to our last story of the hour. As according to River's latest report, 2025 may be remembered as the year Bitcoin quietly changed hands at scale, not through viral TikToks or retail trading frenzies, but through corporate treasury meetings and institutional allocation models that move far more slowly and far more deliberately. According to the report, individuals still hold the majority of Bitcoin supply at 14.01 million BTC, or about 66.7%, which sounds dominant until you notice that this share declined meaningfully over the past year, with individuals reducing their holdings by roughly 696,000 BTC in 2025 alone. That is a sizable shift, and it did not disappear into thin air. On the other side of that ledger, businesses added 489,000 BTC, funds and ETFs accumulated 205,000, and governments quietly increased their positions by 135,000 Bitcoin, suggesting what retail was distributing, institutions were systematically absorbing. Layer onto that the structural realities. Around 1.61 million Bitcoin is estimated to be permanently lost. Nearly 1 million is attributed to Satoshi or Patoshi era mining, and only about 1.04 million Bitcoin remains to be mined at all, meaning the liquid flow continues to compress while ownership consolidates. And for those of you at home, this shift matters because Bitcoin supply is fixed, but who controls that supply influences liquidity, volatility, and market structure in very real ways. When more coins sit on corporate treasuries, ETF custodians, and sovereign reserves, price dynamics can change, and so can the political and regulatory conversations surrounding the asset. Bitcoin does not adjust its code based on ownership distribution. Markets, however, absolutely respond to it. We're bringing Nolan back. Nolan, when individuals sell and institutions buy at scale like we saw in 2025, should everyday Bitcoin holders see that as a positive sign, a warning sign, or simply a natural shift? What are your thoughts?
Unfortunately, it's very bullish. You don't want to make plebs selling their Bitcoin or individuals selling their Bitcoin, because that was always the dream, right? That the Bitcoin revolution would happen through widespread holding of Bitcoin. COVID made me sort of give up on that vision. And I said, well, we're probably going to have to run this truck through Wall Street first before we take over the energy industry. And we're going to have to get Wall Street addicted to Bitcoin. And we're going to have to get them to understand Bitcoin as the metric of success and wealth and the absolute greatest asset they should be trading for. And that's actually what happened in the end. The ETF became the most popular Wall Street product of all time. And now we see, and it fits the frame that we've been sharing here when you brought me on several times and we talked about what was happening in the market. I said, this looks a little bit like market manipulation. This would lend to that thesis and that worldview. And it also fits into something we've discussed around what we call the Mar-a-Lago Accords. So in many ways, when you heard about Trump and Bessent and the Treasury Secretary and what they were doing in 2025 with the Federal Reserve and Stefan Miron, who they put on the board, and the fire, the too slow, too late Jerome Powell, when you heard all of that stuff and people started to wonder what the financial system would look like if you did have this subordination of the Federal Reserve to the Treasury and a reinstitution of how the system used to work, the American system, There was a lot of people in there who believe that the next step in that is to actually inflate the dollar and use Bitcoin to soak up all of the inflation that will come with it. So basically bimetallism. That's what
Right.
Stefan Arana said. Revalue the gold, buy some Bitcoin, and use the hard assets along with the printed money. So you've got one money for consuming, one money for saving. Within that thesis, if you go and read some of the Mar-a-Lago Accords, there is a big belief that the individual holders being so unknown to the U.S. government was a problem. And if they didn't understand who was there, that there was no problem with sideways markets for a year because they could actually shake out and understand who was there. So there's a lot of people who say that there was no lack of appetite for the sideways movement, and that there are people on the inside who understand that it's in something that the Trump administration wanted to experience for a year. Because they just want to know who's out there and see people move with the price gyration. So that's somewhat hallucinated. So I don't have a cause and effect proof of that. This is the same way that I read into the market manipulation story. This just confirms my bias that the market manipulation story is real. And that it will end when they have full control of the Federal Reserve and the print can actually happen. The big print that everyone is talking about can actually happen. So we're still on schedule for that. So my theory still predicts and still holds, and I think it will hold throughout.
Yeah, well, I'm counting on it, Nolan, because right after this, I'm going to Polymarket and seeing what of this I can bet on, because we always appreciate your insights and expertise here. You've done it once before, several times, in fact, and I'm sure you'll be doing it again. So we always appreciate your analysis of all of these world news situations and sharing them with us here at Roxom TV News, Nolan. It's always a blast having you here on our Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday sessions, and I'm excited to do it one more time this week tomorrow, my man. So thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah.
See ya.
All
Thanks for having
you.
me, and thanks to your audience.
Oh, pleasure is all ours. No, we'll see you mañana, buddy. Thank you so much. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News. But when we're back, we're going to be jumping into our second hour of today's top stories. And we'll be joined by not one, but two special guests to break them all down. So stay tuned. Roxom TV News coming right back your way after this. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Now, before we cannonball into our second hour of today's program, let's quickly recap what we covered during our first half of today's show. First, we broke down rising conflict risk between the United States and Iran, where nuclear talks in Geneva are reportedly making good progress, even as U.S. forces build up in the region, and Vice President J.D. Vance reminds everyone that military action remains on the table. The key takeaway is that diplomacy and deterrence are moving in parallel, and even without a single shot fired, oil markets and household budgets can feel the volatility long before any formal conflict actually begins. We also covered the controversy surrounding Florida Congressman Randy Fine after he posted on X that choosing between dogs and Muslims is not a difficult one, igniting backlash from Democrats, civil rights groups, and even some conservative commentators. Fine doubled down in interviews, critics pushed for censure, and the broader issue became less about one post and more about how viral outrage and inflammatory rhetoric shape political tone in an attention-driven media environment. Now, our second hour is filled with top Bitcoin stories and special guests, so let's get started. Gentlemen, let's roll the stinger. The Bitcoin price this morning is sitting around $67,000 a coin, and that brings us to our Bitcoin stories of the hour. Our first one began as a recent interview took a sharp turn when investor Lawrence Lepard challenged analyst Bloomberg Mike McGlone over a claim that Bitcoin is an asset that has unlimited supply, which immediately set off fire alarms. Let's take a look.
if you weren't in it the best 20 days from 2018 to 2025, you missed 600% gains. I mean, so my view is you buy it, you hold it, you dollar cost average.
So
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
You're dollar cost averaging in an asset that has unlimited supply. That's done. It's over. It's reached
Whoa.
the Trump bump.
Unlimited supply. What the fuck are you talking about?
They're gonna go there.
Okay, let's create some controversy here. The crypto bubble. Okay, so maybe you should let me speak before you interrupt, because you're described a classic bear market. You're denying it. You're trying to buy every dip. You'll sell out. You'll stop out when. And I'll say it now, it reaches a pretty low plateau around 10,000. That's usually how markets work. But please understand what happened in 2024. That was as good as it gets. Mr. Trump flipping. Now, if you're investing in the space, not only are you're supporting the Trump administration, you're dependent on the Trump administration. You have stable coins that have taken over the peer-to-peer cash. If the trade is done, and you still have millions of cryptos worth billions of dollars, let's flush those out. Let's get Shiba Inu down to zero, Dogecoin down to zero, and then restart. In the meantime, if you're long any of these highly volatile risk assets completely dependent on beta, you have to have the stock market go up. It's flunked two tests. It's failing versus beta. It's failed versus gold. The whole space is done. Just get out. Wait till you see a lot of stuff goes to zero and then get back in. But the biggest trade in history, the bubble is bursting. I will make the prediction from the future. We will look back at the crypto mania very comparable to tulips. It's just getting started. Like I said, now, if you're buying Bitcoin now, you better hope that 180-day volatility in the stock market stays an 8-year low. You better hope that market cap to GDP stays at a 100-year high. Just acknowledge the trade and trade. Sell rallies and risk assets.
I hope somebody's got a video of this, because we're going to shove this up your ass in a year or two.
Those guys were fun. Now, to his credit, McGlone later clarified that he misspoke and meant that crypto broadly has an unlimited supply, not Bitcoin specifically. An important distinction, though one that only surfaced after the clip began circulating widely. RoxomTV's Connor Sefton just interviewed Mike McGlone on his encounter with Lepard. That full interview will air on his show tomorrow. But in the meantime, let's take a quick teaser look at it.
You took part in quite an intense interview on Monday. What happened?
Well, you're pointing out on Macro Mondays when Larry Lepard used some F-bombs on me and hung up. He did ask a question. I did interrupt him. I apologize for that. And he asked a question about what could stop the bull market in Bitcoin and things. I point out ETFs. So, I guess I tweaked his personality a little bit. But one thing to remember, you learn in this business is one key thing, that mantra that brought out for me, is a good way to really understand someone's personality. Thing I learned in Wall Street trading desks is observe them when they're losing money. So that's what we're seeing a lot in cryptos. I mean, $67 in Bitcoin was not predicted by most people last year. We're supposed to have a 1 in front of it. So there's a lot of people underwater losing money. Larry just wrote a great book. I really respect him for his book. His timing's bad. He should have published in 2019. We've had the big print. And now we're on the back end of the hangover from the big print. And cryptos and Bitcoin are leading the way, and I think they're going to continue to go down. But that incident, I think, really marked a very similar peak. I'm very scared for most people in the spaces. Never get emotional about a number on a screen. Advice I'm trying to give myself. These are numbers on the screen, and most of them track nothing. Even Bitcoin tracks nothing. You have to have the hopium thing. But when people react to someone who disagrees with them in an angry and emotional way, it usually means, number one, they're overweight that asset, they're insecure about it, and they're losing money. And I feel bad for them. I'm sorry, but I'm a father and a risk manager. I have a certificate in risk management. I have to warn people, when I see a hurricane coming, I still think the market's going to go down a lot, cryptos. And the number one thing to stop cryptos go down is you have to hope stock market volatility at about 180-day volatility in S&P and NASDAQ stays at an 8-year low. You have to hope that doesn't mean revert. Oh, by the way, it always does. It's just a matter of time. And you have to hope that U.S. stock market at 2.3 times GDP, the highest in about 100 years, stays that way. I'm fully expecting the opposite this year. Just a little backup in the stock market, and I think cryptos are telling us that's what's going to happen.
You can watch the full interview tomorrow on Connor's show on Roxom TV at 6:30 a.m. EST, so be sure to check it out. Now, the interview will be up on our YouTube and Rumble channels right after as well, so if you can't watch it then, make sure to check them out later. All right, joining me to talk about this story and others this morning, we have independent journalist and good friend of the program, Frank Cora. Frank, welcome back to the show. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on.
What's going on, everybody? Pleasure to be here with you, Hank.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Frank. We got a lot to talk about, so let's get started with this first story. When a major financial platform describes Bitcoin as having unlimited supply, is that a simple mistake to you, or does it maybe reflect a broader misunderstanding in traditional finance circles? What are your thoughts on this story we just talked about here?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Mike corrected himself and said he was talking about cryptos in general having an unlimited supply, but it felt like he should have been a bit more handy with his words in that moment.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing was sort of, it almost made it even sillier, being that the background for Mike McGlone was Bloomberg Intelligence, their Bloomberg Intelligence division. So not a lot of intelligence being demonstrated there. No offense to Mike, he's never been rude to me or anything else, but it really seemed like he had a bone to pick with Bitcoin, like he got in a fight with the CEO of Bitcoin or something. I don't know what happened. Just, we know there's no CEO of Bitcoin, just being facetious there. But yeah, it was a very, very strange moment. It seems sort of like, I don't know whether this is just a symptom of mainstream media piling on. The Financial Times has been doing this, and the same sort of cast of characters that's been writing Bitcoin eulogies for the last decade plus have come out of the woodwork, and they're writing the eulogies again, and all the cryptos are going to zero. And I think that the broader point Mike was making about there just being too many cryptos, they're worthless. So totally agreed with that point. Not being able to differentiate Bitcoin from everything else. You can't, I don't know, you can't have a higher up position as an analyst within the Bloomberg, the Bloomberg sphere, within at the company, and not have a basic understanding of what Bloomberg is and why it's valuable. And I think at this point, they should even understand the value as a censorship resistant money for people around the world who live in authoritarian regimes. Even if just understanding it from that angle, we know that it has value. So it was a really, I don't know, unintelligent statement. It seems like there's some ego involved here. I don't know whether him and Larry have issues. Larry, I know he's pretty hysterical when it comes to name calling and that kind of stuff. So I don't know whether they'd gotten into something in the past, but it seemed very personal. And as we all know, there's nothing, Bitcoin doesn't do anything to anyone. Bitcoin is a neutral protocol that no one person governs, and there are specific rules to it, including the fact that none more than 21 million can be issued. And this is something that Mike should have been not only aware of, but that he should have articulated better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it begs a question, right? Like, it seems like the only people who are more impassioned than Bitcoiners are the no-coiners out there that have been saying no from the beginning. We have the Mike McGloins, the Peter Schiffs of the world. So it begs the question, Frank, why do you think that is? Is it just because these people maybe missed it on the way up, so they just have to keep doubling down because they kind of feel like they've already missed the boat? Like, why are these anti or no coiners so impassioned with their distrust and dislike of Bitcoin when we've had so many other people we've seen in traditional finance who you've talked to, who I've talked to, who might have had similar feelings at the beginning, then did their homework and eventually came around, as it seems to happen with just about everybody. So why do these no-coiners, why are they so upset and angry all the time? Do you have any thoughts on that? Because it seems to be a common thread.
For sure. I think there's three things at play here. One is what you just mentioned. They've been hating on this money. I don't want to just call it an asset, this protocol for money, almost since its inception, or since the mainstream media has been hating on it, which is just about since its inception. And, if you've been watching this, especially, these people all invest their own money as well. Like, if you've been watching this go from $50 to $1,000 to $2,000 to $100,000 and just hating on it the whole time and having no exposure to it, of course you're going to be angry. It's like you could have taken $1,000 12, 13 years ago and turned that into $1 million or something. I'd be furious with myself as well. I think the other side of it, I think some of this is just then ego. There's just, I'm right about all this other stuff, so I have to be right about this as well. And we know that Bitcoin is not just an intelligence test, but is an ego test as well. It will humble you. You will be humbled by Bitcoin. History has bore that out time and time again. And then the third side is mainstream media. I don't know. We don't know where all these talking points come from. We don't know whether the administration doesn't want people talking about Bitcoin as money now. I don't know whether it's just sort of what was sort of passé. It was something that they sort of covered for a while, and now it's not cool to cover anymore. That being said, I think with Mike, he seems to be in his own sort of Bitcoin derangement syndrome in the throes of that right now. So I think that he's going through his thing, probably some combination of the three things I just mentioned, probably much more the former two, the him having not bought any Bitcoin, and then that just the this idea that he's a good analyst. Otherwise, I follow his gold and silver analyst.
Yeah.
It just doesn't mean he has a full understanding of what Bitcoin is. I mean, and he's demonstrated very clearly in that segment that he does not.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like if I were to be upset over Amazon or something like years ago because I didn't buy their stock when it went from like 100 to like $6, and I'm like, if that Amazon's gonna come crashing down, it just has to. Like, he just looks silly at this point.
Yeah.
But it's fun for us to talk about, so I'm at least happy for the entertainment factor element of it. Speaking of which, you and I are going to be joined in just a bit, Frank, by another special guest to break down some more of today's top stories. But first, we're going to take a quick break because when we're back, we have more of the day's top news stories to go over. Frank Corver, myself, and again, another guest will be joining us in just a bit as we talk about PageJoin and others right here on Roxom TV News. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after this quick commercial break.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Now, earlier in the show, we covered the PageJoin Foundation's move to secure official 501c3 nonprofit status from the IRS. And here's the quick recap of that story. So that designation means that donations to the foundation are now tax deductible, giving it a more stable and scalable funding base to expand Bitcoin privacy infrastructure. PageJoin implements BIP78, a transaction format that changes how Bitcoin payments are assembled by having both the sender and receiver contribute inputs, which disrupts common blockchain analysis assumptions without changing Bitcoin's core protocol. On-chain, these transactions look completely ordinary, avoiding obvious privacy fingerprints, while also improving UTXO consolidation and potentially reducing fees. With nonprofit status secured, the foundation now has the legal and financial structure to broaden adoption in a standardized, non-commercial way. As financial surveillance expands globally, tools like PageJoin underscore why privacy at the transaction level remains an important part of Bitcoin's long-term resilience. And joining Frank and I to chat about this story, I want to welcome the executive director of PageJoin, Dan Gould, everybody. Dan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you. How are you this morning?
Doing great, Hank. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours, and we got a lot to talk about. So let's get started with this story here, Dan. Bitcoin is often described as transparent and immutable, which sounds great in theory, but in practice, that means every transaction lives on the public ledger forever. So for viewers who aren't deep into this space, why does transaction level privacy still matter in a system built for openness? We'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I like to bring it all the way back to the white paper where Satoshi recognized that, like a stock ticker, that maybe movement can be seen but not assigned to individuals. When it comes to money specifically, if you're exposing all of your financial activity in Bitcoin, when you send someone money and they can see how much you make, how much you have, who you interact with, it creates a danger where you could be subject to, some sort of targeted bad behavior. So it's important for people to have some baseline privacy, even for their personal safety.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen a lot of bad behavior in the space as of late, especially those like wrench attacks and stuff. Like it's getting a little dicey out there. And Frank, you've reported on activists operating in high surveillance environments before. So my question for you is, when privacy tools like PageJoin gain formal nonprofit legitimacy in the United States, do you feel like that changes how these tools are perceived globally at all, especially in countries where financial monitoring is used to actually suppress dissent? Like, what's your initial beat on this news from PageJoin?
Huge, and congrats to Dan and the PageJoin team. The work they do is incredible. It's really, really important. Having covered both the Samurai and Tornado Cash cases, trials down in the Southern District, it's really, really inspiring to see news related to privacy be positive news, as it should be. And as I've said, I think I've said it on this show, I've spoken with former regulators, former chair of the CFTC, and said personally, when you transact, if we're all moving to transacting with Bitcoin or on public blockchains with stable coins, not that that's my thing, but if people are doing that, wouldn't you want some level of privacy when you go and pay for your coffee? He said, I absolutely would. I said, well, then that's all we're really asking for here. And to your point, there are people around the world, activists, who need this privacy. For example, if you donate, not only if you donate to Alexei Navalny's anti-corruption foundation, so Navalny, who ran against Putin, you are, in the eyes of the Russian state, donating to a terrorist organization. So to make that donation, you need some level of privacy so that you don't go to jail for aiding and abetting or whatever a terrorist organization. So there's all different gradients to this. We all want everyday privacy when it comes to making whatever payments we're making. And then on the other level, on a more extreme level, activists around the world rely on this privacy. It's a life or death situation for them. So it's really, really important, and it's positive to see, it's great to see positive news in this space.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about this news with Dan here. The PageJoin Foundation receiving this 501c3 nonprofit status may sound like bureaucratic paperwork to some, but in infrastructure terms, as we're talking about, it's a big shift here. So my question for you, Dan, is how does this change PageJoin's ability to fund development, attract contributors, and scale adoption over time? We'd love to know the effects of this.
So the big gain with 501c3 is that US taxpayers can get an exemption when they donate to us. And it lets us also carry a treasury from year to year, so we can take donations and keep them without having to pay the income tax ourselves on that. And this lets us sustain a number of developments happening in parallel, integrations, research, and quality assurance protocol design over time without, it gives us more leverage in that regard without having to pay as much. And I think there's a legitimacy standard that we have to meet as well that keeps us accountable to the public interest.
Very interesting. So with this new status, like what's in the pipeline for PageJoin going forward then? So are there any new initiatives that you're able to implement now as a result of attaining this status? Or I'm trying to wrap my head around it a little better.
Yeah, the one thing I outlined in the blog post at pagejoin.org was a sort of example of being able to recruit a developer. So we could get in the weeds, but basically we have technical problems, and going through the grant process externally where we recommend someone can take 6 months. Whereas in this example, we were able to hire, a young, bright person in about, a week. Concretely, we've spent the past year working on this development kit, getting to a release candidate. And now that that is firming up, we're going to be able to integrate far beyond our 2 production pilots. So we have 2 mobile apps right now that use the new async PageJoin software, but over the next year, that'll be able to expand to a whole bunch of wallets.
Interesting. Frank, I'd be curious, do you have any questions or thoughts for Dan on PageJoin and what they're doing over there? It seems like you're a big fan of what they're instituting, but I'd be curious if you have any other things you'd like to ask Dan before we get his final thoughts here.
Yeah, I think just on an emotional level, we were just talking a little bit off camera before the segment started. Dan followed some of the coverage of my coverage of the Samurai and Tornado Cash trials that I just mentioned. Dan, does it feel good, I guess, on a certain level to be recognized in this regard, to be seen as an official entity, an officially registered entity that can do, just this important work now, just in a way that feels a lot more, I think official is the word that comes to mind, above board. Not that you were doing something that wasn't above board beforehand, but it feels like this legitimizes what you're doing in a way that, in my mind, would provide you some relief.
Yeah, I think it provides me relief, it provides the team relief, and it provides the supporters relief because it's legible. People understand 501c3 public charity. They understand what we're doing. They understand that there's a stated mission that we post. We're working on privacy for peer-to-peer transactions, and there's a clear, open framework of us building software, putting it out for review, and advancing the solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm. And Dan, go ahead. No, Frank, please go ahead.
No, I just think that's great. I think the way you said it's really important. And I think like you said, the legibility, the transparency around this, having people feel more secure in the work that they're doing. I just think it's all a really important part to the process. And I think we're still in the because this technology is largely misunderstood. The majority of people out there are still on Bitcoin as a scam. So we're talking about the average member of the public not necessarily understanding this, but I do think that the Overton window is shifting. And I was saying to Dan off camera as well, we just saw Tucker Carlson in his most recent interview. Actually, there was a segment dedicated to Roman Storm and the Tornado Cash trial and why privacy is important. So I feel that we're headed in the right direction. And I want to give a quick heads up to people to obviously pay attention to what happens next with Clarity Act. Check out Coin Center's post on this and Peter von Valkenburg's post on this, because right now there is some risk for the developer. Some of the language from what was called the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which is an act that would be sure to protect developers of non-custodial tech. There's some risk of that potentially being taken out of the bill. So please call your elected officials, let them know that this needs to be a part of the bill. And that ideally we see Clarity go through with this, because I think that, plus seeing things like this with PageJoin, I think we're moving into a world where P2P rights and privacy are protected, and this is essential, if these systems are going to flourish.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And Dan, if people wanted to get more clarity and understanding themselves of what you and the team at PageJoin are doing and what you're going to be doing as a result of this new status going forward, what's the best place I can send them to get more info so they can do their own research?
So go to pagejoin.org, specifically the blog. You'll see a PageJoin dev kit announcement that explains exactly what our vision is for the tech, both what we're building and how we're rolling it out. We've got an announcement of the foundation that's written up there, and we've got an announcement of the 501c3. So you can totally understand what's going on if you head there.
Amazing. Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for dropping in to chat with Frank and I about this story. It's always great getting to hear it from the horse's mouth themselves, and congratulations on the status. And we're really excited to see what you and the team will be up to here in 2026. I think it's going to be a good one.
Thanks so much, Hank.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate your time. All right, we're taking a break here, but when we're back, Frank and I are going to be joined by our next guest of this hour, Mike McGlone. He's the former president of Bitcoin Magazine and PubKey. He's going to be joining us to chat and break it all down right here on RoxomTV News. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
All right, welcome back to Roxom TV News. Now, earlier in the show, we covered the developing controversy around Nakamoto Inc.'s all-stock acquisition of BTC Inc., the parent company of Bitcoin Magazine and the Bitcoin Conference, along with UTXO management. The deal immediately sparked backlash after a viral essay accused founder David Bailey of using a public company whose stock has fallen nearly 99% to acquire private companies he founded, issuing roughly 363 million new shares tied to earlier contractual pricing around $1.12 per share, while the stock currently trades near 28 cents. Supporters argue the structure and call option mechanics were disclosed in prior merger documents and legally approved. And that building a portfolio of Bitcoin native companies has always been part of the public strategy. Critics point to dilution concerns, repeated refinancing during the downturn, and a NASDAQ compliance clock after prolonged sub $1 trading. And the fact that Nakamoto sold 366.91 BTC during the bear market, a move that contrasts with many never sell Treasury peers. So now the debate centers on governance, capital structure pressure, dilution optics, and whether this is disciplined long-term execution in a brutal market or aggressive financial engineering under strain. Now, joining us to talk about this, we have the former president of Bitcoin Magazine and PubKey, Mike Germano, not McGlone. I got McGlone on the brain after we talked about him earlier, and I'm still incensed by what he had to say, and I'm super glad we have Mike Germano here instead. He's much more fun. Mike, thanks for joining us this morning. How are you on this Wednesday?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Oh, yeah, likewise. The pleasure is all ours. And we're here also with Frank Corva, as you know, and we got a lot to talk about. So we're excited that you are joining us this morning. So, Mike, my first question to you is, when you saw this deal and the immediate backlash that unfolded, what was your first reaction? Were you surprised, concerned, or was this simply what public markets look like in a bear cycle? What was your read on this one?
Well, full disclaimer, I was at Bitcoin Magazine, BTC Inc. from 21 till the end of 24, was involved in a tremendous amount of conversations on creating value, obviously, for the company, the conference, the media side of it. So I have an intimate knowledge of where I believe the value of that company is from where there was offers and not. And I'm really shocked by how everyone is treating this. I think it's a lot of people, to be blunt, are pretty dishonest about it, and are making things up because the truth is they might not like David Bailey or BTC Inc. They might not like that Bitcoin Magazine, has been around and the Bitcoin Conference uses that name. But I'm really shocked to see how people are kind of false reporting on this. Number one. Number two, this is exactly what David Bailey said he was going to do. This is the exact reason why this company was started. They've always been telling you that they were going to go this route. And number three, I don't know why people are complaining, because Nakamoto just pulled the best purchase ever. They bought BTC Inc. for $107 million. That's the best deal that they've ever had. That company is absolutely worth, over $300 million. I know, because even in 24, we were looking at deals for well over $100 million valuation that weren't taken, right? Because they have this plan of what they're going to do, build for this global Bitcoin company. And people getting upset by this like it's self-dealing. If David didn't follow through with selling BTC Inc., I could understand their concerns that, hey, this is what we were originally going to invest in, and you kind of rugged us because the price is low. The BTC Inc. owners took a huge haircut on what that valuation is. They've lost a ton of money. So if it was just David Bailey trying to get money, he could have easily sold that company to anyone else. But the value is Nakamoto just added the crown jewel in the Bitcoin ecosystem in terms of events and media that no other Bitcoin treasury company could have bought. Strategy didn't buy it. 21 has a bunch of Bitcoin. I haven't seen a single thing that 21's done, right? So you look at the time to market now. People don't like the way that David and that team might communicate. Well, sorry if you're asking for diehard Bitcoiners to now that, at their core was about freedom of speech, to now be handcuffed by what you can and can't say in public markets and expect a positive outcome. So look, I think this is the same cycle that you see for the Bitcoin conference every year, is people are saying, I'm not going because, I hate that they're doing A, B, and C, and then they stay home by themselves, and then they, hate, regret it, and tweet. So they can, unfortunately, the biggest thing Nakamoto has done is productized all the haters to now, place it at a public company. But, I think that while I'm not the biggest fan of Bitcoin Treasury plays, I'm looking at how I can put together, after this merger, how I could put together $300 million just so I could, buy BTC Inc. and buy Bitcoin. So, I think that looks like one of the best opportunities right now in the market.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you giving us that inside scoop there, Mike. And Frank, what is your initial beat on this Nakamoto acquisition of BTC Inc.? Where do you land on this one?
Yeah, I read Justin Belcher's long post about this yesterday, and I think he got some of the math wrong. I think that given that the strike price was $1.12 and they bought everything with the stock trading at 28-29 cents, they actually paid the deal was actually the reverse of what Justin Belcher was saying. They actually ended up not necessarily being the deal. So it wasn't David taking advantage of the situation, more following through the way Mike just said with his original plan to buy these businesses, which are cash flowing businesses. So the one thing that I don't think anybody has mentioned is that with a lot of these Bitcoin Treasury plays, it's a lot of financial engineering to acquire more Bitcoin, whether that's stock dilution or whatever it is, share dilution or whatever they have to do. Whereas what people often critique about these companies is where's the cash flow? It's like, well, nobody has said, well, David actually just not only followed through on his word to a company to acquire these companies, one of which was UTXO, which was, I think, the best performing hedge fund in the world, not in the Bitcoin space, in the world in 2024. That just got folded into the company. So you're talking about that, the biggest Bitcoin conference or 4 conferences around the world, plus Bitcoin Magazine. There's actual cash flow now for Nakamoto. So I think on those two fronts, it just seems like those two things, I mean, they're totally missing from the conversation. And I think it's a conversation I've had with David personally, but he mentioned it in a tweet, so I don't mind sharing it. Where Bitcoiners, we were doing something totally different. Bitcoin and cold storage and all this kind of like money outside the system is much different than operating within the system. And I think that there is room for companies to operate within the system, especially if they're furthering the Bitcoin vision, whatever that is. And I think cash flow is a huge component to that. David is doing that. He's following through on his word. So I think there's some growing pains, as David mentioned. Operating and building in public is really difficult. And I think that, you can have your issues with it, but all the filings are transparent. You can go to the SEC, you can see what they're doing. That's fine. But if you're going to be critical, I would say you should also sort of offer praise where it's due as well. He is following through on his word, and this is a cash flow positive thing for Nakamoto.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about Nakamoto specifically, Mike, and this one's for you. You mentioned, interestingly, Strategy didn't try to acquire it, 21 didn't, but Nakamoto did. Why do you think Nakamoto made that play as opposed to a Strategy or 21 or someone else? Because as we know, especially in today's world, those who control the media help control the narrative. So why do you think Nakamoto felt this was the right fit for them?
Well, you bring up the most important point, and I think what the foundation of Nakamoto was. It has the media. Now, is Bitcoin Magazine the best performing media outlet in the Bitcoin crypto space? No, it's fallen off a little bit. Is it one of the most trusted, and does it, has it been an institution? Absolutely. The Bitcoin conference, on the other hand, everybody who wants to think that they can compete with that, they can if they would like. I've yet to see someone even come close. And more importantly, what I think everyone misses is obviously there's so many unbelievable Bitcoin events to go to. But the global media tunes in only to the Bitcoin conference.
Right.
That's it. When you look up Getty Images and you look at Bitcoin, it's all people at the Bitcoin conference. The Bitcoin conference, as much as the diehards might not like it, is mainstream, and that's its vehicle. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to shift the mainstream conversation. All the biggest announcements have happened on that Bitcoin conference stage. And while anyone has a chance to build it, no one's come close. No one's been able to scale multiple events and global events of that size. No one has, I think it was in the last year I was there helping with stuff in 24, when Trump was obviously there, you were talking over 1 billion media impressions. So the value there is kind of untouched. The reason why these other Bitcoin treasury companies haven't purchased Bitcoin Magazine, BTC Inc., is because they couldn't. And they should have. Right. But
yeah,
look, the whole point was that's what made, I think, the Nakamoto investment to earlier investors interesting. Obviously, you can play the same game that all the other Bitcoin treasury companies are playing, but now you have an asset that no one else can touch. Now, I think now you have the global megaphone for everyone else. You're gonna play nice with them, and you're gonna keep retweeting every time, Michael Saylor says something. I mean, obviously we did a partnership with MicroStrategy and Bitcoin Magazine a couple of years ago for the Bitcoin for Corporations, because MicroStrategy didn't have a media arm, right? They weren't going to be building that out. There was a partnership with Bitcoin Magazine, and to obviously push the narrative about companies that are trying to participate into the Bitcoin space. But, like I said before, everyone talks about this company not having enough, maybe senior executives or not being Wall Street ready. Well, I lost just as much money investing in 21 or Adam Back that was supposed to be backed by the Tether and Cantor Fitzgerald people. The Tether side, which I have a lot of respect for in terms of as an operation being able to scale, and yet I haven't really seen much of where they're pushing things. So I look at what Nakamoto has done in a short amount of time, and it's been pretty impressive. And now that that's off the table, what else is there to acquire to try to make yourself a full Bitcoin company? People might be buying financial apps and these other things, but if you're talking about pure Bitcoin, what else is there to acquire of any scale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And, another thing that I think is important about this story is kind of the context and the timing at which this is taking place. Because as you two both know, we've seen Bitcoin equities go through a euphoric surge and then a pretty brutal collapse over the last cycle. But we're all Bitcoiners here, so par for the course. But it does beg the question, this one's for you, Frank. Does this situation at all feel like maybe it's fallout from that mania we've experienced over the last 6 or so months? Or is this something fundamentally different? Like, do you think the timing of this acquisition has anything to do with where we are in the Bitcoin ecosystem right now?
I think. Well, one, we're all in the. If you've been in the Bitcoin space for a while, as you mentioned, you understand this sort of pain acutely. We've seen Bitcoin do these sorts of run-ups and drawdowns comparable to what a lot of treasury companies did. I think one advantage that David Bailey and the team has is that David's been through all these drawdowns with Bitcoin, and he knows that the strongest survive, and you have to survive the bear markets, and you have to keep building and doing things in the bear markets. And I think that's what the announcement yesterday proved, that he's willing to continue doing that. I think what I'm more nervous about is some of the newer entrants, some of the ones that said, "Oh, that's cool, we could just put Bitcoin on the balance sheet," that might not have the stomach for this way down. I don't think everybody survives. I don't think that's how it works. I don't know who does. I don't know how it works out. It's going to take an actual commitment, a real commitment to not only having the stomach for it, but creating a business that's providing value to people the way that the Bitcoin conference does, as Mike pointed out. And just a quick note about that, this idea of Bitcoin interfacing with the mainstream media and all that, there's an immense amount of work that went into establishing all of that, and there's a lot of value in that too. And even the fact that maybe most of the mainstream media even attacks it, just the fact that you're moving it to a different place, that it's not just sort of the insular world of just Bitcoiners talking to other Bitcoiners. I understand that feels comfortable and exciting because we all love the Bitcoin culture and the Bitcoin ethos, and that's fine, but it's going to have to move into different arenas if it's going to become ubiquitous as money, or what we all want it to become. Just a quick side note on that. But I think the bigger thing is going to be only the strong survive. And I'll give a shout out to Saylor. Strategy traded at $13 in the bear market last time. Everybody called it out, discounted it, said it was done. You could say what you want about him, and I've been critical of some of the stuff he's done. He did stick it through. His conviction remained. I was talking with Dylan LeClaire about this. Even when everything dropped that first time, Dylan remembers sitting down with him and Saylor just saying, "Okay, we got to make a new plan. Let's go." And I think the people who have the sort of can white knuckle this and sit down and say, "We're going to make a plan and we're going to execute that plan while things are tough," they're going to be the ones that get the upside when things get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Saylor's basically the human personification of that bull in front of Wall Street with the giant brass balls. I saw he's been buying like crazy during this downturn. That man knows no stop, and I love it. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the architecture of this deal. And Mike, I'm super glad we have you. I'm hoping maybe you can give us some clarification on this. So, roughly 363 million new shares are being issued at prior contractual pricing, which is around $1.12, which is well above the current trading price that I think is around 28 cents. So structurally speaking, Mike, how should investors evaluate the dilution in the context of this deal? What are your thoughts on how this actually ended up being mapped out here?
Yeah, so just to be careful, even though I worked there up until the point of going through all this public, the public process, I want to give that as a disclaimer that I'm not revealing any information that no one else would be knowing about. what it seems like is typically understanding the value of what BTC Inc. was. Obviously, when they're doing this deal, they put an option. They were very public about it. Here's the strike price. The valuation would roughly put, let's say, BTC Inc. at $350 million. I know that sounds like a big number to a lot of people. The UTXO obviously has a tremendous amount of value and a financial way to calculate. The Bitcoin conference was the biggest, I think, valuable star there. Bitcoin Magazine coming in third, but an engine that all work together. If you're looking at $350 million valuation for it, that makes sense. Now, what I'm sure the Nakamoto team was hoping for was that the Nakamoto price would be at $4 or $5, and all of a sudden they were getting really the upside on that as getting a call option for $1.12 or whatnot it was for the share price. Like I said before, I really do believe that if you are an investor, right, when everyone says, "Oh, you bought, you lost all this money buying Nakamoto," well, you were buying Nakamoto at an exaggerated price that didn't line up with the amount of Bitcoin that they had. But if you're realistically looking at this at $112 million market cap as it is right now, I think it has let's say it has a $300 million worth of Bitcoin, $200 million worth of debt, and they bought a $350 million asset for $107 million. Are they upset? Are people upset about the dilution? Well, I don't think Nakamoto ever said we were just going to be a pure play Bitcoin Treasury holding company, right? That's its base, and they were always like they've done before, that they were going to be an engine for Bitcoin companies. And if investors are looking where the proof is in that, a lot of companies say we're going to help launch Bitcoin companies. Don't trust, verify. Look at what BTC Inc. has done. It has launched numerous companies under its umbrella. It's a house of brands, if you will. Everything from Bitcoin Magazine, Pro to how it was able to jump, the Bitcoin Policy Institute and have that launch. So it's always been an incubator and a catalyst for new businesses. So now having that engine put into your Bitcoin style, Bitcoin company that's going to infect all different lines of work, it has the proof of being able to do that. Does it need to mature for how it operates? I'm sure that the traditional market would love that, right? So it's always going to be the balancing act of what the traditional market wants to see in their numbers and what you're actually asking for innovators who've proven a track record of doing so, try to harness that energy and get value from it. So, like I said, this is the best value Nakamoto has pulled off. They bought Bitcoin at $118,000. So the biggest thing you can be mad about is that they overspent for Bitcoin, right? Like that was their worst they yet, was buying Bitcoin near the top, but they were just that excited. But they've literally bought BTC Inc. at rates that they could have got for triple anywhere else. So I think that was a real gift that they've given to the Nakamoto community. Maybe it's to try to make up for some of the things. But I think they've just got a tremendous amount of value asset, and the dilution is part of that, but they really got real value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not enough just to build things, but to actually be able to control the narrative and have the media behind it, because doing the stuff isn't enough anymore. You got to be able to tell people effectively that it's out there and that you did it. And I think this is a really nice acquisition for them. So I'm on board with you on that one. And I'm always on board when we get to have you on the show, Mike. So I appreciate you so much joining in with us. And I know you've got a project of your own in the works. And I know a lot of us out there in the Bitcoin community are waiting with bated breath. So for those in our audience out there that are waiting to see what's coming next from Mike Germano, what's the best place I can send them so they can stay up to date with what you've got going on?
Yes, well, thank you for that. Thank you for that plug. I'm at Mike Germano on Twitter, or X, because I'm old school, is the best place to keep in touch. And we'll have some announcements, obviously, before the Bitcoin conference, and a lot of exciting things that we are doing for the space and to fight for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin brand.
Amazing. Well, Mike, you're doing God's work out there, and we always appreciate when you're able to join us here at Roxom TV. So thank you so much for your time and lending your insights, especially on this specific story this morning. Always great to have you on, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, my friend. It's been a real treat.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Mike. All right, Frank and I are diving into our last story of the morning. So Frank, hang tight. I'll be back with you in a second because this one is taking place inside Iran, where financial surveillance is not theoretical but routine. Bitcoin privacy tools have served as more than technical upgrades. They have functioned as protection. And Frank, you recently interviewed Iranian activist Zia Zadir, who described how Samurai Wallet became a critical tool for activists operating under state pressure. In this interview, Frank detailed how activists providing free VPN access during unrest could only accept Bitcoin or crypto donations anonymously because receiving funds through traditional systems would expose them to government targeting. Now, Zia said community members worked with the Samurai team on Dojo infrastructure, helped with translations, and requested smaller mixing pools, explaining that Iranians don't have a lot of money. They cannot mix half a Bitcoin. Now, Zia also shared a personal connection. After being detained in late 2023, he recalled checking X to see who had supported him. He saw Samurai people tweeting about him, calling the developers one of the best people in the space. He credited them with building tools that enabled freedom of speech, freedom to transact, and said he hopes others continue speaking out on their behalf. Frank, we're coming back to you. A few questions for you that I would love for you to expand on this one. So, do you think that Western audiences fully grasp how privacy tools are used in authoritarian regimes right now? I would love to get your insights on that.
I don't, and let me quickly make this very real for all the people listening in right now. The Iranian people cannot use the internet right now. The regime is shutting down the internet for people. So just the fact that you're listening to Hank and I speak right now, that's probably something you're taking for granted. So before we even get into financial privacy, which is just not a thing in these places, that's something that people need to sort of be aware of. So what Zia was doing is raising money to also help people get onto the internet via a VPN. And so I think that's VPN in conjunction with, this was a while back. I think this was in conjunction, I'm sorry, Starlink, Elon Musk's company. Is that right? Am I saying it right? Starlink?
Yeah, Starlink? Yeah.
Yeah. So you have him doing this work. But as I mentioned earlier on the show, like if you're donating to somebody who the government maybe considers terrorists or an enemy of the state. So Zia was imprisoned by the IRGC, so the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is basically the military division of the regime that runs Iran. He was imprisoned by them. So this isn't like theoretical to Zia. He's dealt with this. And so the Samurai devs, back then, they obviously can't help now. They're both unfortunately in jail. We're helping him to create smaller pools for Iranians because they didn't have, let's say, half a Bitcoin to mix. And I purposely highlighted this and clipped this from the interview because there was a lot of rhetoric around Samurai devs and some of their sort of bombastic rhetoric around, hey, Russian oligarchs come use our service. But one of the more underreported things was that this was technology that many activists use. And I think that I hadn't heard this story about Iran. This was the first time I had heard it when I spoke with Zia. And I thought it was really, really, not only were they like, oh, this is great, this technology exists, but the devs were listening to the needs of the people living under this authoritarian regime and building things that probably, I would say financially, it probably wasn't worth the developers' time, but you could tell that they fundamentally believe that privacy is a human right, and they did this. So it was a really, really beautiful part of the story. I think it was really important that it was highlighted. I appreciate you guys highlighting it here and letting me talk about it on the show, because again, as you mentioned, in Western audiences, they don't necessarily understand this. I think we're all going to start understanding the value of privacy more and more as AI-enhanced surveillance becomes more of a thing, as Palantir's technologies become more widespread. I think we're all going to sort of understand acutely just what privacy means, financial privacy, other privacies. But people who are living under these regimes, they already understand it very, very well. Zia is a perfect example of this. And again, I appreciate you guys highlighting it.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you covering it. I mean, this is one of those instances, privacy here in the United States, akin to Bitcoin here in the United States, does not mean the same thing as privacy in other places and Bitcoin in other places. As we've seen, like I always turn to South America where inflation is so bad. So Bitcoin to them is a very different thing than what we believe it is here, which is generally we just kind of associate it with number go up. Yeah. And, from a media perspective, Frank, why do you think these human stories often get overshadowed by price speculation and enforcement headlines? Are they just not as sexy, or people just can't relate to them quite the same way? Because these are important. And like you said at the beginning of your piece, we take for granted our ability just to see the internet. And we got places in Iran where people don't even have access right now.
Yeah, 100%. I would say that there's something I've been thinking a lot about here that's at play. There were protests in Nepal that happened about a revolution, I would say, that happened. I guess it was about a half a year ago now. There was a lot of to do about it as it happened, but then it sort of died down. And I had a conversation with somebody who was from a part of India that's about borders Nepal, and he had a lot of friends in Nepal that were part of the protests. And I said to him, I said, do people now understand this technology more? The human side of why this technology is necessary besides number go up, Bitcoin type stuff that most people usually associate with it. And he said no. And he said the issue is more political than anything. He said oftentimes these human interest stories get told more through media that's more aligned with the left. But the left doesn't tend to like Bitcoin. So you have this issue of like, it's an incongruence. People who don't like Bitcoin because they see it as like, oh, it's just this extension of capitalism, and capitalism is evil and blah, 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 blah. We've heard that. But then at the same time, I've shared this with people on the left. I've shared the stories like Zia's story, and there's a deep cognitive dissonance. They don't know what to make of it because they associate maybe Bitcoin with Trump or a right-wing thing or individual liberties, and that's I'm here in New York where we talk about the warmth of collectivism now, or our mayor is talking about the warmth of collectivism. So I think that there's this, I think HRF does really great work. The Human Rights Foundation does really great work in showing people why freedom tech matters, especially to activists who live under authoritarian regimes. But I think, unfortunately, the left here doesn't understand the severity of what it means to live under those regimes and why Bitcoin is necessary because they've never actually lived through that. So I think we have, personally, I look at it as my job to make Bitcoin not just something that the left embraces, but a bipartisan lens that people look at Bitcoin freedom tech more broadly as just a tool for human flourishing, that we're all entitled to privacy, to freedom to transact, to freedom to communicate. But these messages are going to take a while to get through. I do believe they will get through, but we have a lot of work to do in terms of shifting the Overton window as far as the left beginning to embrace these technologies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why we love having you on this show every Wednesday, Frank, because you're doing God's work, giving voices to the voiceless and turning the lens on some unheralded but very important stories in the world out there. So we always thank you so much for bringing your insights and expertise with us here at Roxom TV News. It's always an absolute treat, and I can't wait to have you back next week for more, my friend. So I wanted to thank you so much for stopping in with us this Wednesday, and we can't wait to have you again next week.
Much appreciated. Seriously, thank you to Roxom. Big shout out to you guys for giving space to these stories. I think they're really important, and I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to talk about them.
Oh, and before I let you go, I'm sure there's at least a couple people in our audience that have not had enough of Frank Corva's beats. So what's the best place I can send them to stay up to date with whatever you're talking about?
Yeah, we'll do this quick. X at Frank Corva, LinkedIn, Frank Corva. And then if you could, I would really appreciate this. You can find me on Fountain. New Renaissance Capital is my podcast. And then YouTube, just type in New Renaissance Capital. My next interview coming out there after this one with Zia will be on a gentleman who is running a Bitcoin circular economy in the largest slum in all of Africa. So largest informal settlement on the whole continent of Africa. There is now a Bitcoin economy that has formed there. And that interview will be out by about maybe 5 or 6 days from now. So New Renaissance Capital is the platform. Follow me on Fountain, Spotify, Apple, all that stuff, YouTube. And again, appreciate you giving me the opportunity to shill a bit there.
Oh, pleasure is all ours. And everyone in our audience, you now have no excuse to have more Frank Corva in your life. So go check him out. And Frank, thank you so much. Can't wait to see you next week, buddy. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Take it easy, everybody.
Cheers. All right, gang, that's a wrap for Roxom TV News today. Thanks as always for tuning in and watching with us. If you haven't already, make sure to do the thing. Like, follow, subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, me at Hank at Roxom TV. And of course, be sure to check out our amazing guests on their platforms as well. We got really amazing, smart, informed people with a lot to say on this show. And the learning doesn't end when this show ends. It actually continues on for your own things at home. So make sure to check them out, and thank you for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, same top stories right here on Roxom TV. I'll see you at 8 a.m. PST Thursday for our Thursday edition here at Roxom TV News. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you boys and girls tomorrow. Have a good one.